If you'd like to follow along this morning, we'll be looking in Luke chapter 10, familiar story about the Samaritan. I always appreciate Gene's thinking on his feet for the children's, Gene's little friends' children's time. I wish I was more adept at thinking on my feet, but I'm a noted speaker. And so I have to have my notes, but Gene's real good about changing all that. Did anybody else think that this could have been a lesson on patience that he had this morning with the wait? That'll sink in a little later. But maybe that's why Gene does that, not me. So, anyway. Today we're starting our little 4-week campaign on our on-point idea. And really the idea for the next 4 weeks is we're going to explore various areas of stewardship that we have where God has given us responsibility. I don't like the word stewardship all that well. It sounds kind of old and it sounds kind of churchy, and it's something we don't really use a lot. But we're going to look at some responsibilities that we have, and not only financially, we're going to talk about money in our series, but we're also going to talk about the opportunities that God gives us, not just to use money, but to give of our time and our abilities that He has given to us. And the reality is, stewardship is really a good word. It just means we've been entrusted with some things and that we're to use them faithfully, whatever they may be. And so that's what we're going to talk about. We're using the compass as kind of a logo for this series, and we're going to take north, south, east, and west. We're going to use the first letter of each of those directions for the main point of what we're going to talk about each week. So this week we're using the letter N, and we're going to talk about our nature, because our natures reflect not only our attitudes, but it will reflect a lot of our actions as we get involved in various things in life. God has called us to a great opportunity for service. And so we seek to serve Him the way Jesus served Him, the way that Jesus served us. You remember the story about the old Indian that was talking to his grandson, and he said that he had within him 2 wolves fighting. And what he was describing was the negative side and the positive side of his person, of his nature. And as he's describing this to his grandson, finally the grandson says to his grandfather, "Which one is going to win?" And the grandfather says, "The one that I feed." And that's a reality. You and I are really made up of, we're very complex beings because we're so much like God the way He's made us. And within us, we have tendencies. We have natures. The Jewish people talk about 2 basic natures that we have. The Yetzer Hara, which means the sinful nature, and the Yetzer HaTov, which is the good nature. So the evil versus good idea. And that battles inside of us because that's just the way it is. We live in a fallen, broken world, and sinful stuff, evil stuff, permeates everywhere, and we battle with that day in and day out. And so which one we feed is the one that's going to win. I like the story of the grandparents that went to see their grandchildren. And by the way, young adults, when your parents come to visit at your houses, they're not coming to see you, they are coming to see their grandchildren. Just want you to know so you don't get surprised. But the grandparents are visiting the grandchildren, and every afternoon the grandfather would take a nap on the couch. Well, one afternoon, the grandchildren decided they'd have a little fun with Grandpa, and they smeared Limburger cheese on his mustache. When he woke up, he began sniffing the room, and he said, "This room stinks." So then he got up and went out into the kitchen. After a little while, they heard him say, "The kitchen stinks. I'm going to go outside." So he goes outside to get some fresh air, and a few minutes later, they say he said, "The whole world stinks." And really, you know people like that. It doesn't matter what it is, it's always bad. There's always something to complain about. There's always something that's wrong. There's something that just stinks everywhere. And you also know people who, on the other hand, always seem to find something positive going on, regardless of the situation, regardless of the circumstances. They're looking and they're finding that in spite of the bad thing that's happened, there's something good. And doesn't that just irritate you? That those folks just seem to find good stuff all the time? Well, really, that's the natures. And in this story this morning, we're going to explore three attitudes that reflect the two natures. So let's begin in Luke chapter 10, starting at verse 25. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Now, before we go on, let me just tell you, a lawyer is not the guy that's going to go to court with you to be your defense attorney or the prosecuting attorney. In this context, a lawyer is a man who has studied the Torah, the law of Moses, in detail, and he's a law expert. So this lawyer stands up and he challenges Jesus. Now, sometimes people challenge Jesus because they wanted to trip him up. They wanted to find something they could disagree with, and just like the Sanhedrin will do, they will find something that they can literally hang him on. So they will give him to Pilate to be crucified. But normally, what would happen is, if you met a rabbi, you would want to ask him questions to understand what he believes and what he's teaching. So this lawyer tests Jesus. What shall I do to inherit eternal life? What's written in the law? Jesus does something very rabbinic. He answers a question with a question. And so the man then quotes from Deuteronomy chapter 6 and Leviticus chapter 19. Love God, love your neighbor. That's really the essence. And that's what Jesus said remember when they asked him what the greatest commandment is? Love God, love your neighbor. And so this man gets it. He understands some things. And he said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." Now, the problem is, this man asked Jesus a kindergarten question. Okay, this is one of the simple ones. And now the man is probably a little embarrassed. And so, desiring to justify himself, he said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Well, as you think about the parable Jesus is about to tell us, think about the different characters as we go through this little parable, this little story, and see how they reflect in regard to the words of God and the love of God and the love of people around them. And then make those applications to us. Who are we in this parable? Who are you in this parable? And as we explore this, we're going to notice three attitudes in the two natures. The first one is that of the thieves, the robbers. And you'll notice in your bulletin there's a fill-in-the-blank section for the sermon if you'd like to fill in those blanks. And this attitude of the of the thieves reflects the attitude of what's yours is mine, and I will take it. Notice what he says. Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. He fell among robbers who stripped him, beat him, departed, leaving him half dead." This is the attitude that many have in the world. What's yours is mine, and I'm going to take it any way, and every way that I can. How many scams have there been on the telephone and on social media and all different sorts of ways that people try to get your money? You may not have a lot of money, but everybody wants everything you've got, and they're going to try anything they can to get it. It may not be legitimate. And so here are thieves who are coming to take what is yours. What's yours is mine, and I will take it. And that's really what Jesus describes in John 10 about the ultimate thief who comes to kill and steal and destroy. And Jesus contrasts that with him. He said, "But I have come that they might have life and have it abundantly." Here's the thief that comes to this robber as he's going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he falls among robbers. They strip him, they beat him, and they leave him half dead. Literally, that says they leave him dying, that he's on his way to die. There is, of course, with the thieves, some process involved. Many times in the first century, when people would travel on these roads, they would travel in groups because there were robbers. There were people who would threaten their lives. And so they would travel together because there's safety in numbers. This is why in Luke chapter 2, when they go up to the feast in Jerusalem, Jesus is 12 years old, and he is participating in some things in the temple, and the family and their group get together and they go home. A few days later, they realize they left Jesus back in Jerusalem. Well, the reason is they're traveling in a large company, and they just assumed, like in the movie Home Alone, they just assumed that Jesus was with them. But he wasn't. He was back in Jerusalem. This man in this story is traveling alone. He's taking his life into his hands as he travels from Jerusalem to Jericho. And the robbers in a group attack him and they beat him. Now, this is an unexpected event. The man may have needed to have been on guard, but he really did not know when the robbers were coming. Jesus describes his next coming. When Jesus comes again, he says it will be like a thief in the night. You understand that? The thief is going to come when you're not expecting him to come. The thief is going to come when your guard is down. You may be off on vacation. You may be out doing something. The thief realizes you're not there. He's going to come. Or he comes in the night when there is less opportunity to be seen. But it is an unexpected arrival that he has. And he takes from this man, the thieves take from this man, they strip him, they beat him, and they leave him for dead. Here is this terrible process that this man has endured because they are guilty of covetousness. I want what you've got, and I'm going to take it. Which is exactly why in Exodus 20, when God gives the Ten Commandments to the children of Israel, he says, "Thou shalt not covet anything of your neighbors." This is the result of covetousness. This is the result of desiring what somebody else has, and you're willing to do whatever it takes to take it away and keep it for yourself. So the thieves had that attitude, that picture of who they are and what they do. But then let's go on. The next group are those of the priest and the Levite. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. Now, what's mine is mine, and I will keep it. Okay, these are religious leaders among the Jews. The man who is robbed is going from Jerusalem down to Jericho. That's elevation. That's not direction. Jerusalem is up in the mountains. When you went to Jerusalem for the feast, you went up to Jerusalem. And then when you got to Jerusalem, you would go up to the temple. And you would go there, and God would come down to meet His people, and they would participate in the different feasts. And then they would go home. And in going home, they would go down. This man is on his way to Jericho. He's on his way to where many of the priests lived. Many of the priests would live in Jericho. They had a 2-week obligation at the temple a couple of times a year. And so they would live maybe in Jericho or some other places, and they would come to Jerusalem for their brief work in the temple, and then they would go home. So this man is on his way down that road, and apparently the priest and the Levite, or at least the priest, is on his way down the road. I assume that means elevation as well, that he's coming from Jerusalem. He too is headed for Jericho. Please notice that they are observant about their surroundings. This priest and this Levite see this man lying half dead on the road. He's literally dying. His blood is flowing out of his body. And he is lying there on the road. And they are observant of what's going on. They are also observant of the law of Moses. The law of Moses said if you were to touch a dead body, you would be unclean ceremonially. That if you touch bodily fluids, you likewise would be unclean. They know this. So they're on this road going from Jerusalem to Jericho, and they see this thief lying, or this man lying there who's been beaten and robbed by the thieves. And they are aware, and they cross on the other side of the road. Now, I don't know what you picture in your mind about that road. For years, I thought that the Jericho Road was at least a 2-lane highway. So you could have traffic going in either direction. That you could go, or maybe 4 lanes, pretty wide and so on. We think about maybe like our 10th Street here, something like that. But that's not the case at all. Jericho Road was simply a path that may have been 5 or 6 feet wide. And so as the priest and the Levite come along this path, they notice this 5-foot-something man lying on the road, and they step around him. Or they may have actually stepped over him, depending on how you picture this. But they're within close proximity to the man. It's not like they looked down the road and saw an armadillo lying on the side of the road down there. They saw this man right there. And they don't stop to help in this man's predicament. They had greater concern about some other things. It may be that they were concerned about their ceremonial cleanness. I don't want to deal with this man, because if I deal with the man, I will become ceremonially unclean, and I'm going to have to go through a great process in order to get that cleanness back. But please notice, if the Levite or the priest is actually coming down in elevation, down the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, he has completed his work at the temple, and he's headed home. Now, he still may not want to become unclean, but it's not like I don't want to be unclean going to the temple. It could very well be that he just doesn't want to deal with it. I don't want to deal with this man and the time commitment that I'm going to have to put into this. Could be that they're thinking, this is a dangerous scenario. The robbers may come back. And if they come back, they can get me too. So I'm going to hurry on and let this man die. Whatever the reasons. Jesus doesn't tell us the reasons in this parable. I assume that the people who heard this story had a lot of ideas about why the priest and the Levite are going to walk by on the other side of the road. They had greater concern. They had personal fear, perhaps, concern for themselves, fear about what might happen to them. But when you think about what Jesus did as he came among us, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus took time for people. Jesus put himself in harm's way for people. Jesus became ceremonially unclean, if you will, by taking on all of our sins. And he was willing to do that. You see, you're the most important thing in the world to Jesus. That you matter more to him than anything else going on in this world. That Jesus is all about people, and the concerns that he has for you are innumerable. And he wants all of us to be in relationship with God in a way that would honor God and be a fulfilling life for us. And so he did what he did because he was filled with compassion. But let's go to the third character. What's mine is yours, and I will share it. And a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. And he went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back." Now, the Samaritans and the Jews weren't the best of friends. When the Jewish people came back from the Babylonian captivity, they began rebuilding Jerusalem, the walls around Jerusalem. They began rebuilding the temple. They began restoring their priesthood and their worship and all of those things. And the people of the land, who were a mix of Jewish people and pagan people, wanted to help. And the Jewish people said, no, we're going to do this ourselves. You can read Nehemiah and Ezra, and you can see the conflict going on there. We're going to do this ourselves, and we can't let you in. It's got to be purely a Jewish thing. Now, the Samaritans were half Jewish, half pagan. And there's a great conflict that went on between them. Eventually, the Samaritans would withdraw, and they would go to a mountain in the Samaritan area, and they would worship on that mountain. They built their own temple. And with slight variations to the law of Moses, the 5 books of Moses, they took the Torah, Moses' books, and they went to their mountain, and they worshiped there. Now, when a Pharisee told a parable like this, there were usually 3 characters in the parable. There was whatever the situation is that's going on, and then you would have a priest or maybe 2 priests or a priest and a Levite coming along that are going to mess up in the story. So the Pharisees telling this story, and this priest and this Levite, and they mess up, they don't get it right. And all the people would chuckle, yeah, we get it. Because the Sadducees and the priests are part of the Sadducee party. The Pharisees are the rabbis who are in a different set. It's kind of like political parties. We kind of get it that way. So you have the Sadducees in one party and the Pharisees in another party. And of course the Pharisees are using the Sadducees as the butt of the joke in their stories. So here are the Sadducees. This priest and the Levite, they mess up. Everybody is expecting Jesus to say, and then along comes a Pharisee who's going to be the hero of the story. But that's not what he does. And along comes a Samaritan. And I can hear a gasp in the room. And people are going, wait a minute, what? Samaritan? There was a time in the book of Kings where the Samaritans actually took care of some Jewish people who had been beaten and imprisoned. So that may be one thing. But here's the Samaritan who looks around and he sees the same thing that the priest and the Levite have seen. And this Samaritan, instead of neglecting them, decides that he is going to take care of the man. And if you notice in this account that he does the opposite, he reverses what the robbers have done. He comes with compassion, and he bound the wounds, pouring in oil and wine, set the man on his animal, took him to the inn, and he gave money to the innkeeper to take care of the man. It kind of reverses the order of the things that the robbers had done. Now, I don't know if this was on Jesus' mind or not, but the Samaritans observed the 5 books of Moses. So did the Sadducees. That's all that they really focused on were the 5 books. The rest of the Old Testament, Pharisees looked into, Jesus knew, quoted. The Apostle Paul, in order to become a disciple of Gamaliel, had to quote the entire Old Testament. He had to be able to do that. But the Sadducees, the priests and the Levites, just the 5 books. So here's the Samaritan, who also knows the 5 books of Moses. And guess what? He keeps the 5 books, or he keeps the law of Moses better than the priest and the Levite. He loved his neighbor as himself. Leviticus chapter 19. He knew the text. And he did it better than these Jewish people did. So here is this man looking after, filled with compassion, looking after somebody else, giving of himself, putting himself in harm's way, loving his enemy even, and treating him like a neighbor. He gives his time. He gives up his resources. He gives up even ceremonial purity. He too would have been guilty of becoming unclean ceremonially when he went back to Samaria. Our nature and our attitude determine our outcome. How are we going to live? What are we going to do? Some have the attitude, what's yours is mine, I'm going to take it. You know, there are people who scam churches. I can't tell you how many people have come through the door with the exact same story, and we can fill in the blanks if they'd let us. Yeah, I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to say, and it's a scam. There are folks that want to take from others. There's scammers on the phone, there's scammers on the internet, and sometimes it just gets frustrating. There are countries in the world that pride themselves in scamming Americans. It gets tiring, doesn't it? But that's some. Some have the attitude that what's mine is mine, I'm going to keep it. Well, I worked hard for my money. I'm not giving it away. I've got it for me. I spend a lot of time at work. In fact, at night I'm so tired I don't have time for anything else but me. So I'm going to keep my time for me. And then there are some who say, what's mine is yours and I'll share it. It may be my time. It may be the abilities that I have. It may be my money. In the case of the Samaritan, it was all of that. He took care of all of it. Our attitude determines what we're going to do, our nature. Are you the one that smells the air and says it stinks everywhere? Or are you the one that says there's something good in everything, something powerful in everything for all of us? Two salesmen went to an island to sell shoes. The first one arrived on the scene and noticed that everyone was barefoot. Stayed a few days and was observant to the people of the island. Called his home office and said, I'm coming home. Nobody here wears shoes. The second salesman arrived at the same island, spent a couple of days looking around, called his home office and said, send me 10,000 pair of shoes. Everybody here needs them. Which one are you? Determines how you act, what you're going to do as to how you see and what your nature is. We live in a world, again, that's fallen and broken and discouraging and depressing. And a lot of times we throw up our hands and say, nobody has the gospel. Nobody has Jesus. Come on, Jesus, take us home. We're ready to go. This world is just a bad place. It's not our home. We're just a passing through. Come get us because it's a tiring, depressing place. Nobody has Jesus. We can say that. Or we can look around and say, look at the opportunities for the gospel. Everybody needs Jesus. And there's a way that we can serve. We can reach out with our time and our abilities and our money in order to reach out to people who are hurting and broken, just like that man on the road between Jerusalem and Jericho. Who are you in the story? You're there somewhere. Which one of those three are you? I hope you're not scamming, and I hope you're not hoarding up for yourself. I hope you're one of those who's willing to share with others. Close our sermon this morning with one more verse. He asked the lawyer, which of these three do you think proved to be neighbor to the man who fell among robbers? He said, to the one who showed mercy. Jesus said to him, you go and do likewise. I want to challenge you this week to go show mercy to somebody. Somewhere you're going to come across someone who's legitimately hurting. Show mercy in some way. We're going to stand and sing an invitation song this morning, and if you need to respond either to put Christ on in baptism or for prayer for some reason this morning, we want to encourage you to come. So let's stand and let's sing.